My conversation with Jeffrey Heine, the Chief Revenue Officer of Novidea, provided a wealth of insights into the evolving landscape of the insurance industry in general and in Asia specifically.
I do think AI is going to start to play a bigger and bigger role because I think it's just naturally something when you start to think about opportunities we talked about with data. AI can be used to produce data. So injecting that within business processes where it could take over some mundane tasks, but more importantly, help augment what you do in terms of data to maybe lessen the dependency on going and seeking that data.
From the importance of ground level experience to the promise of digital transformation and artificial intelligence, Heine's experiences and perspectives offer an actionable guide for insurers aiming to innovate and better serve their customers in the region. As the industry continues to evolve, these insights will be crucial for navigating both the challenges and the opportunities that lie ahead. Hi, this is Michael Waits, and welcome back to the Asia InsurTech Podcast. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on the show. How are you doing today, by the way?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I was excited for the discussion.
I'm excited about it as well. Look, before we jump into the main part, let's give our listeners a little bit of your background for some context.
Yeah, so I've been in the industry for the better part of 30 years. More on the service provider side, so not necessarily a practitioner, although having helped settle some claims early days with Hurricane Andrew in my first role with CCC. That was that I have been behind the desk, but I've been in a chief revenue officer capacity for quite some time on global positions. I've worked for some very small companies, some that grew to be very large. Probably one of the folks that the folks would recognize as Guidewire. Also spent some time in the London market and the Asian market with Adsensa. Recently exited from Betterview, which was acquired by Nearmap. Big presence in the Asian market as well. So I love building teams. I love solving complex problems for the insurance industry.
Yeah, it's fun. It's a great surface to be able to solve those problems on. So can I ask you this? You said you spent some time in Asia, but you also said you spent some time doing claims at the beginning. Do you think it's important for people to actually sit on the claims desk when you look back at your experience, and even if it wasn't for that long, just to get a sense of this? Because, look, a lot of the people that I talk to in the insurance industry say the claim is where the rubber hits the road. And I think it's super important for people to be there when that happens. What do you think?
Absolutely do. It's not necessarily a prerequisite to do my job, but I think it's enhanced a lot. But I'll tell you, it gave me a really good appreciation, not just in terms of the systems and the technology, but the actual event itself. Seeing the devastation and the real reason why insurance exists and the opportunity to serve the customer. And so I'm a big advocate of the insurance industry, having seen firsthand, the claim experience. And I know a lot of folks in the industry pride themselves on being there for their customers, and fulfilling the promise. So I think so. It really helped me, and it kind of reshaped how I thought about the problem set too. In terms of what you think about, in addition to that, I saw it at the box at Lloyd's, watch folks underwrite so I think actually really understanding how they work through the challenges, not just in terms of the systems, but how they really need to deal with their actual and policyholder and the whole chain that is insurance is important.
There's just so much to unpack there. You said the box at Lloyd's, right? To me, it almost reminds me of the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, like in the 1980s and 1990s, where you could see like what's really happening down there and people actually trading. I don't think underwriting, because it's a risk mitigation exercise, right, is that far away from making a trading decision at some level. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And in fact, it's one of the only places where folks physically trade. And having been to the NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange in America, I heard all about the Lloyd's market, and I had the grand tour, and saw the book where the Titanic was written, and so it's really kind of cool historically being a partial nerd in the insurance industry, but then they actually watch the brokers and the underwriters trade, and how they actually use information, how the relationship matters, and really the holistic experience, including claims, where we started our discussion, and it really gave again another firsthand experience about how it's traded, but also when you start talking about large, complex commercial risk, global exposure, how folks think about it.
Yeah, I love it. I love talking about Lloyd's as much as I possibly can, just because I think that whole experience, I want to go. I haven't been yet, but I think that everybody should do it. Can we talk a little bit about your experience in Asia and then Novidea's experience going on in Asia as well?
Yeah, so, I've had experience in the market, many different countries, more on the core system side, but also risk selection. So I would think about it in terms of the core policy admin, and then the risk selection side. And admittedly, my background is a bit more carrier centric, which is why I was excited to help really more go towards insurance distribution about brokers and agents in that area too. So having seen that trading proposition, but also there's the different nuances. Every country you go to, they write risk a bit differently. It's priced a bit differently, which I think is really nuanced. Even just within Southeast Asia, there's that ecosystem as well. And there's what's interesting to me too is that how data is either available or not available in these different regions. And I've noticed that is, where I believe the APAC market is a bit further ahead embracing digital transformation than, say, other regions. From a data availability use standpoint, I haven't seen as much. So I'm like, okay, that's a really good opportunity. And just most recently, I guess it was about a month or two ago, came back from ITC Asia, very much, forward facing in the market. And there was real great discussion around digital transformation too, within Southeast Asia, but more broadly too.
So talk to me. I've been to ITC Asia a bunch of times. And frankly, this year I was also at ITC in Japan, and I actually spoke there. So very familiar with the entire ITC platform. Talk to me about some of the key takeaways there. And the second part of this question is I want to talk about some of the specific challenges in Southeast Asia, but I want to get to that after you tell me about ITC Asia, because I was not, unfortunately, able to attend this year.
Yeah, so interesting. And too, by the way, I want to mention we do have anchor clients. I generally don't mention that. We have some top 10 brokers and intermediaries in the area that are implementing within Singapore, Hong Kong, a number of countries, really a Southeast Asian focus, and it's drawing us to APAC. I want to make sure we do pick that up. So it comes with some experience. It's one of the reasons why we're in the market is the fact that there is growing demand for what we do. So wrapping into being really boots on the ground and focused and on the market, the ITC Asia was all about digital transformation, which was exciting, not because that's what we're a part of. We generally take part in those projects, but it was really stark to me where folks had already embraced it and they started to take a move on it and are thinking incrementally about it. So it's not a theoretical, it's very much a here and now, we want to do this. And what's interesting too is it wasn't surprised because we did a survey of the global market, and actually Southeast Asia was by far the most favorable towards making this digital transformation. Like by 3/4 of the surveys of folks surveyed wanted to do that. But when you actually look at it, the thing that really sticks out, not the thing, but the aspect about the market that stood out is it's such a service-based market. A lot of businesses are in the service business. That's number one. It's a lot of KPIs. And it's not that you don't hear that in the States or UK and EMEA, but it was so stark that everybody I talked to wanted to know about how can I transform the service we provide to our customers. And it was like, okay. So I talked to one of the folks who's advising us to recently, well, think of where you are. This is what we pride ourselves on. So, which was great because our survey also said the number one driver was better serving customers. So when you think about that, and if you don't mind, I'll continue on for a second. A lot of what we do is core processes in terms of how you broke business or how you underwrite business, how you adjudicate claims, all the financial underpinnings of that. But what's really exciting about the ATC Asia, there's a lot of talk about how do we engage our customer in the process. And, the byproduct of that is either mobile apps or portals or whatnot, but it was not you didn't have to sell folks on that. They were already asking those questions and looking for what you had in terms of how to help them serve their customer better, which is showing up in the implementations we have already in the region.
Can you talk to me about this idea of engagement, right? Look, one of the guys that I talked to who's building a digital bank, which is a completely separate business, says the banks in a way have it lucky because people engage with their banks on every single day, sometimes more than once a day, right? They make a withdrawal, they make a deposit, they use the bank to pay for stuff. But how do you sort of foster this engagement in the insurance space, whether it's a mobile app, whether it's online? How does this happen and why is it so important?
Yeah, I'll give you my thoughts on this too. And this is agnostic to the insurer, to the reinsurer, broker. What happens, you buy a policy, whether you're an individual or a business, and you hope you never have to talk to folks until you have a renewal. But actually more and more what I'm hearing, that's a missed opportunity. And so remediation This actually came from some of my former roles where how do you take a proactive position, predict and prevent to say, okay, here's your exposure. Here's what's happening. There's some things you can do. I'm going to give you a really, really simple example. If you have a home and you have trees and you're in a wind-prone area, why aren't folks saying, hey, cut those trees back, or starting to think about that huge topic of that with wildfire-prone areas, hurricane-prone areas, about being ready in that. And so using that remediation engagement, I'm starting to see some of that from a personal standpoint. And some of the larger carriers that have risk engineering firms have that, but it's pretty intermittent. But also, when you start thinking about it, this is my little baby when I start to think about it, it's a missed opportunity. When you think about the best risk manager is the insured themselves. They know the most about the exposure generally. Or if they don't, would be willing to help you source that information. And so trying to engage them throughout the process is, Joe. So it's not just, I have an endorsement, or I have a midterm change. You're proactively engaging with them to make sure that you understand and track that exposure. Now, a lot of folks try to do that with automations around data, but my thought is keeping that conversation going, even if it's on an automated basis, depending upon scale, the businesses and but just universally the policyholders that you serve.
So 2 things on the data front. So you said earlier that you were a little bit surprised that data availability was ahead in Southeast Asia, or maybe in Asia, or maybe you didn't say you were surprised, but just the fact that it is. I'm curious why you think that is. And then the second part of that, my question is, do you think that data availability does provide, and sometimes in real time, an opportunity to use that for the engagement that you were just talking about?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So let's say, and I think I heard your question right, was more around perhaps in some cases, the lack of availability of some of that data.
Why do you think the data availability is better in Asia? Let's just start with that.
Well, actually, I was thinking it's not in certain kinds.
Okay, tell me.
Yeah. And I'll tell you why, because it's density of population and where the vendors go and can monetize that. Now, that's more of a commercial proposition, but there's generally public available data. So I think it's more use than availability. And so I see some opportunities to serve the industry in that area too, where it's not only providing the structure for a digital transformation, but the opportunities to engage the businesses and the policyholders, because they may have that data. That's part of the vexing issue that everybody talks about is using that with a short period of times and then scale. And so engaging the folks that are a part of that, the policyholder, the insured, is probably one of the key ways forward. And it's not like it's not done at all, but that's a massive opportunity that I see.
I think so too. Look, I have a health insurance agent, right? I own my own health insurance policy, and I wear this thing every single day, not to be fancy, but because I track my heart rate. I ran today like 5K in like 32 minutes or 33. Like I do all this stuff to stay healthy. And I'd love to have some kind of benefit from that feeding right into her so that she can come back to me and go like, that's great, or whatever it is, even if it's just for encouragement to stay healthy, if that makes sense, right? I would love that engagement. Do you feel like a lot of the customers that sit in my position are like I am, or am I an outlier?
I don't, again, full disclosure, I'm just a cloaked idealist and an optimist. So, I'm a little biased now.
Oh, no, there are 2 of us now.
Folks like you did not. Yeah, there's 2 of us. But yeah, there's definitely more people than not. It made me think about the same thing. I have my ultra and doing my runs, and it'd be nice if that data was just fed to my doctor for feedback. It's not. But I think that same parallel when we start talking about property and casualty insurance is really the key. I think there's more folks that are willing to share, as long as that there's the respect of privacy. There's a lot of privacy regulation across the globe too. I think as long as we do it and make sure that we show that we're going to be good stewards of data and how it's going to be used, I very rarely see somebody object to the use of that data, especially when you're trying to help them manage their risk. If they know what it's being used for, it's not going to be resold. And it's generally to help them. And whether it's, everybody thinks about the price, but also the proactivity of how you actually manage that risk. Most folks are not going to say no. There's always going to be a percentage that just don't want to share their data, but I would argue that more would want.
I think you're right. I think the people that don't want it are edge conditions, and the people that do want it are just fit like right into the norm. Do you want to talk a little bit more about Novidea and kind of the benefits that it provides to its clients out here. And maybe if you have, without taking names, right, without giving away names, but just maybe like a couple of success stories and stuff.
Yeah, I could definitely do that. And so two that really pop out is you start talking about the operational efficiencies and just background. And this is not agnostic to Southeast Asia or Asia. It's just an industry issue. Good old the 4-letter word of legacy systems, and I use the plural because that it is, because that's
more than 4 letters. But who's counting? Go ahead.
Right. But you look at that, it's not just a legacy system. And most folks think of a back-end policy system, policy admin system that you enter data in. But there's also how you broke business, how you sell the business, how you actually service the business. There's underwriting platforms. And when I look at that, just the fact that you have all that, the legacy, the costs that you carry, but you're also, when you think about it, you're disconnecting people and processes, but also data. There's not a lot of data use throughout those processes. And so when I look at that from an implementation of uniting in one platform, we've seen operational efficiencies dramatically, where capacity increases by 60%. And so when I think about that, and it's a we're a natively cloud-driven platform, so that is great. So from a deployment standpoint, maintenance and your upgrades is great, but really starting to think about it as a unified set of processes rather than different systems is a bit groundbreaking in the industry. Another is, we start to think about growth. What we tend to look at is the top level issues. How do you help your people be more efficient and be more cost effective and drive costs out of the business? Because that's going to help everybody, including the policyholder. But then also when you start to think about the data silos, the problem with that is there's just opportunities lost. So if I think about it from a broking perspective, I'm missing the opportunity to use data to better counsel my clients. As a policyholder, I might be better off getting advised on certain risks I may not know of, or products I could buy. And of course, the insurers would care about that. We've actually, in one of the implementations, have seen the actual renewal amount increased by 30%, but the actual upsells and cross-sells they have with different products that serve the various segments. And this traverses general insurance, commercial insurance, upsells by 40%. So it hits both top and bottom line.
Yeah. I was going to say, do you also think that removing the data silos, right, and having what I'll call data connectivity across all parts of the value chain inside of the company, I'm not even talking about the external facing stuff, but internal, if you talk about operational efficiencies. In other words, if the claims department doesn't have to ask the underwriting department for some data because it's already there and it's shared and it's verified and it's clean, doesn't it also make the internal relationships better? Because, do you know what I mean? And if that's true, then it makes sales, renewals, claims, all this stuff even better without having to do anything, even if it's just on data sharing, no?
Yeah, I love that point. If I think about it, and let me give a great example. Like, claims is becoming a theme in our discussion, but oftentimes when you start talking about, the AMS systems, which we're an insurance distribution platform, to be clear, we're broader than that. Claims is a fundamental part of it. Why does it take a monthly review or a report that's a couple weeks late that one of your top insureds had a large loss? But why does it take that delay? And imagine a scenario, and this happens, where because you're working in a connected world, that's a piece of data. Let the actual account managers know, let your brokers know, let the leader of those agencies know. And it doesn't necessarily kind of applies to everybody, but you now have the ability to drive processes, and I'll call it proactive service. Back to that whole idea, what just resonates so much to me when we from ITC is just, how do you better serve your customer? Look, having the call from the head of the brokerage doesn't stop the fact that the claim happened, but one, it shows they care. There's a lot to learn from that in terms of risk mitigation. But also, if that happens to me and I'm a business owner, I'm going to remember that as perhaps a terrible experience from a claim, but also that somebody really is actually working to protect me. And so that's where I start to think about opportunities to really unite a back office function, typical back office function, with how to better serve the customer. That's a great example. There's many more, but you can start to talk about it. You're not looking at data loss. You're talking about using it to drive a process.
I want to make an analogy and see what you think about it. if you sit on an equity trading desk, a sales trading desk, right, where you're serving multiple clients and your clients are sometimes trading one stock at a time or 10 stocks at a time, right, which trade in two separate systems. We built something a while back that we called Smart Sales Trader, right? So it gave that person, in this case, it's the account manager or the salesperson. They have all this data in front of them in real time. It's different on a trading desk than it is on an insurance trading desk, right? Because it doesn't necessarily have to be real time because the policies aren't being updated constantly. But if you have 100 clients and you can see all of their stuff together and you can then plan out all of your sales calls and all this other stuff in real time, and then when somebody calls you, boom, their name just pops up like it did for us. You're right. That customer service thing, because the data is now shared across the whole platform, just gets so much easier. And in a way, for us, it was more fun actually to do it. Does that make sense?
It does, because, look at that. And I want this to be a promo about how do we drive digital transformation. But I'll say from a Novidea standpoint, that's core to what we do. It's making that information available so you can actually have proactive lead campaigns based upon opportunities you see across customers that bought other products. And also maybe think about notion of profitability, how much time you're spending on clients. And that profitability is really, really key. Ultimately, we're an enablement platform to help them make their better decisions. They can do that. But again, I want to stick with, it's not just about selling more product. It's about the reality is, making sure that you have the proper cover for your exposure. And like, customers could say no, but if they don't even know that they have that opportunity, then they're going to experience that loss, and where it was preventable.
Yeah, I love this comment that you made earlier, this phrase that you made earlier, maintaining the promise, right? It's just such a great phrase, because the more you talk to people inside the insurance industry, the more they're focused on this idea of there's an inherent and implicit, maybe even an explicit promise out there that you're there for coverage and protection. And I love the phraseology that you use of maintaining that promise at all times. It's really great, yeah?
Thank you. Yeah, and look, really one of the cool aspects of having a global position and serving this industry, and I mean that sincerely, is that you meet folks from all walks of life, but there's a common thread. When folks are in insurance, they actually really care. They really do care about the customer, and it's not their fault that sometimes processes and systems get in the way of actually showing that. But man, oh man, it's we've seen some pretty devastating scenarios with cat scenarios, and they're there and not just because they're fulfilling their promise, they actually care. And so I tend to be very biased towards the industry and what their intentions are.
Can you talk a little bit more about Asia? Look, one of the things I think about is that the market out here is really fragmented, right? In other words, you mentioned this earlier, but like Indonesia is not Vietnam. Vietnam's not the Philippines. The Philippines is not Singapore. How do you address all of these little nuances and micro markets in a way that's still effective, whether it's localization or, all these little things that are different just across markets?
Yeah, you actually said it great, because, you're based in Chicago and looking at a map, it's like, oh, looks like a nice tidy region, but it's very diverse, right? The same way when people think, oh, it's America, like there's a lot of diversity with 50 states and territories. Right? It's really like, my thought is getting on the ground and understand the needs in each and individual country. So there are some large corporates that have offices that roll out systems globally and whatnot. But our clients and our partners, I think, are taking a very, very smart approach, because we start talking about localization, that's a big key. Natively making sure that you work within the currency and the language parameters of what they have, what are the local tax and regulations, right? So to be able to configure those without some sort of massive build on a country by country level is really, really important. But you know what? It also goes deeper than that, because depending upon the country, that you're going to have, different counties and councils, and I don't know all of them, but that are going to have different tax and regs. So getting to that level, and especially when you start talking about the trading relationship, where there's an insurer that writes the risk, there's a broker that places it, or agent, and sometimes they have to create different scenarios about commission scenarios and structures. Being able to support that is really, really important. And what I've seen is really no different in Southeast Asia or Asia that I've seen in other parts of the world. It's very fragmented from a vendor system landscape. Front, middle, and back office are very disconnected. They're somewhat forced to actually work in a certain way that another country might work, which sometimes works, sometimes not, leads to a lot of homegrown or making do. That's where I see some of that opportunity where this is just my point of view. I have to say that I believe the market's been underserved compared to, say, the States or UK and EMEA, probably because of where the basis of those companies are, but seeing a lot of legacy and disconnected platforms. So not that they're bad, but they're just past the prime of actually helping serve the customer. And so I think there's a real opportunity. The other part I wanted to make too is we talk about the region, but there's also companies that just do business in Indonesia. That's okay, right? There's still challenges in terms about the individual areas of that country. And so I guess what I want to say is like, you can start to expect more. You don't have to make that basis the compromise or start on the basis of compromise.
Yeah, look, I mean, I know this from living in Asia for the past 34 years and working in the financial services industry for 20-something of them. When our main office, right, where all decisions got driven from, was either in New York or in London, it was hard to get like all the modernization that was out here. So the fact that you put the boots on the ground is just going to make that easier for the companies that are out here that you're servicing. How do you, I don't know the right way to say this, right? But whenever you enter a new market, there may be, and this was true like when I joined Morgan Stanley in 1990 in Tokyo, we had to, because in 1990 or 1991, I can't remember, we actually shut the office in Hong Kong. And the Hong Kong and Chinese market looked at Morgan Stanley and they were just like, are you here? Are you not here? Do you know what I mean? How do you build that trust? I think you call it a committed partner, but how do you build that trust over? It takes time, but how do you do that?
Yeah, I think part of it, there's a couple of things. One of which is you make a real commitment to the region. You put people in place in the region that wake up every day thinking about that region. That's the start. And so from a commitment standpoint, it doesn't mean you have to have a massive team right away, but we start thinking about, systems perspective, the folks that are going to sell and service it and continue to evolve the product is key. The other part is I'm big on, if you say something as a leader, like lead from the front, put some time in the region, meet with customers and make sure that you're actually listening. That was actually my number one goal in going to ICC Asia. I'm like, I understand the market and certain markets better than others within Asia. But I really wanted to listen, like, okay, what's there, but also what's not there. And I'm glad I did because, it's really easy to say, oh, well, it's really around customer experience. But every single person talked about that. And so really starting to make sure we're fostering those conversations on that, in responding to that, but also going, okay, here's where we are. This seems like it takes you a step forward. What else do you need? And so I think really being engaged and, a great example is, user groups. You're getting a group of users that start to work, and that tends to come as you get more business in a region where you have representation from your customers at all levels. It's easy to think about the folks that ultimately send you the money order or write the check, but really having the representation to help drive the roadmap going forward, because digital transformation, is not just about implementing a system. It's about a journey and continual innovation, which was again, there's a lot of what's next, for us as well.
I agree. Look, before I let you go, I'm curious, just based on your experience and the stuff that you learned at ITC Asia, but also just on what you've seen over time, how do you envision what's happening out here evolving? Not in any specific time frame, because you're right, it's a constant journey. But like if right now it's this, if it's digital transformation and all the stuff that you learned this year, where do you think it's going as that starts to get addressed? And then what's the next thing or the next few things you think that need to get addressed?
Yeah, I look at it and say, I think the region in and of itself has a real shot to be kind of a leader in terms of digital transformation that doesn't just put a prettier screen in front of your back end. It really starts to engage the customer. I actually see that starting to happen. So I think over the next couple of years, it's realization of that vision. It's a bit cliche, but I do think AI is going to start to play a bigger and bigger role, because I think it's just naturally something when you start to think about opportunities we talked about with data. AI can be used to produce data. So injecting that within business processes where it could take over some mundane tasks, but more importantly, help augment what you do in terms of data to maybe lessen the dependency on going and seeking that data would be key. I also see an opportunity too is ecosystems. Whether you're a data provider, whether you're a system integrator, there's all sorts of different partners to bring them more to the front of the process, and how they better serve the customer, which is why I bring up AI, not just to be cliche, but often what ends up happening is these APIs basically happen more towards the middle and the back office. Well, what about the opportunities to bring all these different partners up front and better serve the customers? So I think there's going to be some opportunities where you might be able to see some cross-selling across brands and different data use, assuming that there's permission, because of that focus on the front. And that's where I think it gets exciting.
Oh my God, you've just brought up so many different things. I want to address AI in a second, but the ecosystem thing, let's do this first. Do you see an opportunity to connect to other platforms, whether it's e-commerce platforms, whether it's ride-hailing platforms, all of these big platforms that didn't exist 10 years ago, as just another methodology for be able to help insurers connect to their end clients as well, if that makes sense? And how do you do that? Like, how do you get involved there?
Yeah, yes, that's exactly kind of my thought. Is there's just a wealth of data, but also opportunities to collaborate from a service standpoint. I like the ride-hailing apps because they have a ton of data they're sitting on, and they're using it to make the experience better. But what about managing their exposure? Which is great. And there are some carriers that do offer insurance based upon use. So I think that is something there's a really good opportunity to start to think about that integration of experience. There's even some car manufacturers that are offering insurance. So I think that's key. So how do you do it? I think what you need is demand, from customers. And I think you've seen from a service-based perspective in that industry, that there is incredible demand. You're also going to need real protection of data, real respect for privacy in that area too. But also from a technical perspective, I don't want to miss this opportunity. One of the reasons why the industry is in the state that it is because they have closed systems. And so having an open API, the ability to say, okay, great, I can send you data, I can receive data, what experience did you want? I think the key is put that work on the vendors or partners like us to do that work so the end benefit goes to the consumer. Don't make it too much of a lift for them. And, that's an area you hear a lot about, marketing of OP and API and OP system. That's a great example of what you can do with it with real demand and the right type of partners.
So are you suggesting, and you can say no, right? But, some insurance companies just focus on health insurance. They don't provide auto insurance. And and that's just one example, right? But are you suggesting that if Novidea builds this platform on top of that and it's open and connects it, that if you see somebody buying health insurance for their 18-year-old daughter, it may be the case that they're also buying them a car, and then you may consider the fact, or that if someone's going to have a baby, that their family's expanding, so that maybe they're going to buy a bigger car, that there's also an opportunity then to cross-sell, even if it's not your product. But hey, if you're doing this, why not talk to the team that's selling auto insurance as well? And so that these companies don't have to build that themselves, that you provide that connectivity tissue that then helps build that ecosystem. Is that what you're suggesting?
Connective tissue is the key about the API, absolutely. And these are life events and change. I love the way you phrase that because it starts to drive opportunities, to better their life. If you're going to need, and maybe they just had another child and they need a bigger house. Okay, great. Well, they're moving well, they're going to need insurance. And so thinking holistically about that consumer experience, also the business experience. It's not as if it's just a personal experience as well, or personal. Yeah. So I think those opportunities are abundant. It's going to, maybe the industry starts to think a different way. The point I wanted to make, there's already that move with affinity programs. So they're basically, you're marketing to specific groups of clients in the same class. So I think of all sorts of different organizations. Those are kind of like an attempt of serving specific needs of a certain demographic and likely common exposures. But imagine that kind of extrapolated out across how people live. Most people have a place to live. They drive, they take transportation, they need health insurance, they go to eat. There's all sorts of travel. Think of travel insurance. It's offered when you book on a flight, but through that experience, you could offer that based upon other factors. So, a lot of it requires data use, but I think the companies that think differently about that, I think they do, but they're sitting, when you go to a closed system, it doesn't enable that. It kind of shuts down the conversation too.
Yeah, I mean, look, if your child lives in Singapore but has applied to Harvard and gets in, they're going to have to get on a plane or on a boat, hopefully it's a plane, and go to Boston. So they're going to need travel insurance. They may need international health, like all these things. But if those systems are closed, you're not going to have that connectivity. You're not going to be able to do that cross-selling. And if everybody wins. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting because you mentioned like bringing it close to home. one out of university, one in university, one going to university, and all the different life events. I had to proactively go buy car insurance and all the different
figure it all out. Yeah.
You had to figure it all out rather than the industry being unable to be proactive, because I think they want to be. It's just that barrier that I'd like to see us. And again, I would look at it and say, back to the point that the Asian market has a real shot to be, a leader in that area. And the data shows that from our survey and my conversations.
Yeah. Look, I think it definitely is. I think there's at least in my mind, there's a natural movement because there's so much opportunity out here. I won't say it's greenfields, but in the 30 years that I've been living here, I've never seen it more vibrant, more creative, more innovative than it is today. And that's not just in one country, it's across the entire region. Like if you go all the way from New Zealand all the way to the west coast of India, you're seeing all this insanely innovative stuff happening. And I don't think that's going to go away. And frankly, if you look at a map of the world, if you look at, I think it's a circle around 5 hours from where I am right now, there are more people inside that circle than outside that circle, and most of them are currently underserved. So I think it's a massive opportunity. Before I let you go, can we talk a little bit more about artificial intelligence? And again, not because it's so cliched. AI has been around for 50 years, but the throughput and the processing power and the availability, the democratization of access to it has never been like it is today. And I think that's why it's so important. Do you get a sense that there are real use cases that you're seeing? And again, I think it's two sides of this market, right? There's an external customer service sense of this, right? But also an internal, like, how can I do my job better and more efficiently and have more fun doing it if I have better access to information and I can do better analysis, and then go external and serve my clients better? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think kind of like, I'll talk about the immediate and the long term. The immediate, I see so much work being done in spreadsheets and so many emails back and forth that, you know what, you call it mundane work. I want to be really, really clear. This isn't meant to go get jobs or take jobs. This is work that people don't want to do anyway. It's lost time. Yeah. And so, and it's a shame that, we're 2024 and walk out of a lot of meetings and still see folks using spreadsheets, and we have to do better on that. So I think AI starts to serve a need about driving, certain intelligence processes. So you can use technologies like that to say, okay, if I have to send a submission to market and I'm literally seeing a team of people have to do it manually, you can train models to actually do that and probably better, and also to respond. And these are advanced enough where they know where to call out for human input. So it's not just totally taking over the process, it's the handoff. And that's the way I try to practically think about it. And then, big picture, think about that whole idea of kind of like, I'll call it the digital wallet, digital exposure wallet for businesses and consumers. You could have models constantly working to improve what that aggregation of understanding the customer risk. And look, I'm more of the use case and business person out of it versus the people in the weeds of doing it. So tremendous respect, but I see a plethora of use cases. What we need to sort out is data use, privacy, and just start really transforming that into actually helping the people that still are serving the industry, and then using that to actually go to the end consumer. And again, a lot of opportunities within the market.
I want to make the case that every generation has at least one type of technology that, I don't want to say the press, but that like externally gets demonized and says it's going to put like thousands or millions of people out of work. And at the end of the day, all it does is make them more productive or create new types of jobs. And like the spreadsheet, Lotus 123 is the perfect example of this. All accountants are now going to be out of work. Really? How about all accountants are now going to get 10 times more clients? Is really what happened at the end of the day, and created way more services that they could offer around the automation, because they could do their simple stuff, the like you said, the mundane things way faster, and then offer way more services on top of that they couldn't even have conceived of before that. And the automobile was the same way. The washing machine was, we can go back into history, this constant stirring and drang around, like everyone's going to be out of a job. And there's no historical precedent for this actually happening. So I'm on your side on this.
Agreed. And, especially when you see people still suffering in broken, we call it paper processes, but now they're automated, so they actually work worse, right? You start to see that. They go to spreadsheets. And so you have this non-virtuous cycle. So I'd like to get out. And I think AI is a huge part of, even just taking some baby steps across the process to do that is a massive opportunity.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to comment on before I let you go?
Just thank you for the opportunity to talk about it, and look forward to continuing to serve the market. You could tell them high energy and light like the market, and look forward to working with more folks in Southeast Asia and APAC more broadly.
Jeffrey Heine, the Chief Revenue Officer of Novidea. That was awesome. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you, Michael.